Thanks for listening to the latest episode of the Wildcast podcast. I'm Justin Spears here with my guy, Michael Lev. We're talking all things Arizona football. Plus, we got Big 12 Bonanza picks. We'll be looking at this week's Big 12 slate. We got conference games, Lev. How about that?
We do. And when we get to the picks, you will notice how small most of the point spreads are, which I think is indicative of how things are going to be all season long in the Big 12. A lot of close games that go down to the wire, games that could go either way, games that can turn against you if you have a certain side, as happened last week in a couple of instances that we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, we're there. We are starting Big 12 play. Arizona, of course, is not. They have the week off. But almost everyone else is getting into the thick of league play here.
Arizona takes the week off, like Lev just said. They are 2-1 right now after their 31-7 loss to Kansas State. They are removed from the AP Top 25, so Arizona's unranked. Plus, with their loss to Kansas State, it's not only the first loss under head coach Brent Brennan, but it also snaps the Wildcats' 9-game losing streak. So they got to sit on this loss for a little bit, not only during the bye week, but leading up to the game against Utah. And Utah is also going to be a very tough challenge, maybe even the toughest challenge Arizona will face all season long, going on the road, playing against a Utah team that is the preseason favorite to win the Big 12, plus Cam Rising. It's we all thought, his health was maybe could sideline him for a couple weeks, but he's going to give it a go this week against Oklahoma State, and we'll preview that game later on. And the battle of the veteran quarterbacks, that is Cam Rising and Ala Bowman of Oklahoma State. But before we get into all of that, just want to remind everyone that the Wildcast podcast is presented by Tucson.com. Also, check us out on the Wildcast podcast platform on Apple and Spotify. Please give us a rating, comment, review, all of those things. All right, Lev. So Arizona's 2-1. They lost to Kansas State last week in Manhattan. And I think, honestly, it was how they lost. Like, it's one thing to lose to Kansas State, but it's another thing just to get kind of embarrassed a little bit, or, Kansas State punched Arizona in the face. That's just how I put it. And the score, in my opinion, was a little bit closer than how the game truly went. Because if you look at some details that happened in that game, Kansas State left out 17 points potentially, right? Because the missed field goal towards the end of the first half, that's a 48-yarder. If they make that, that's 3 points. Plus, Kansas State was also, inside the red zone at the end of the first half. And then Avery Johnson ran out the last 11 seconds of the clock. So that's another empty possession for Kansas State. And then Arizona forces a 3-and-out to start the second half. And then you're thinking, hey, maybe Arizona can kind of get back into this game. It kind of reminded me a little bit of the Mississippi State game minus the turnovers, where Arizona was completely outplayed, but you look at the scoreboard and you're like, how the hell is Arizona even in this game? Like, it was 14-7 in the third quarter, and then Kansas State just completely took over from there. Avery Johnson and their rushing attack just took it to Arizona, and Arizona had no answer for them. Arizona's defensive line looked weak. They didn't look like they had any sort of responsibilities. They just kind of looked like they were out there just running around with their heads cut off. And when you also add in the offense not scoring after the first drive, and then the punt return for a touchdown with Tyler Loop's first punt, it was like, usually you could say like, oh, one side of the ball Arizona did great on. I think in all three phases of this game against Kansas State, Arizona failed. And it was the first big test of the season, and they showed they still have a lot of work left to do.
There were definitely breakdowns on defense, but the defense only gave up 24 points in that game.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you. There could have been another 3. They make a field goal. There could have been another 3 at the end of the first half. Still, 24 points, not terrible. Like, you should be able to win most college football games if you are giving up 24 points. The bigger concern, I feel like, is the offense, right? You go from 61 points in the first game, 22 points in the second game, with 2 of those coming on a safety, 7 points in the next game. You don't score a single time after a beautiful opening drive, which was very efficient, it balanced, and all of those things. That's worrisome to me.
Yeah.
Like, what is wrong with the offense? I did my cat stats this week. And it was a deep dive into the passing attack specifically. And if you are a longtime listener of the podcast, you will recall that last year we had a discussion about TTT, time to throw. This stat that Pro Football Focus has basically measures like how long is the quarterback holding onto the ball. And one of the areas where Noah Fafita was significantly better than Jayden de Laura was Noah got the ball out of his hand fast. 2.55 seconds on average last year versus Jayden's 3.21. Well, this year, Noah's at 3.16, which is second slowest in the Big 12 and almost in Jayden territory. Additionally, he's holding the ball for 6.6 seconds on plays where there's a scramble involved. I mean, he's basically morphed into Jayden de Laura somehow in this offense, like running around. There's no like timing and rhythm to the offense, right? Like catch the ball, 2-3 step drop, 5-step drop, boom, boom, the ball is out. We're not seeing that a lot, right? And I don't know if that is because of the structure of the offense, if that's because he's just not used to the offense, if it's because he's not used to the other guys besides T-Mac. They lost a lot when they lost Jacob Cowing and Tanner McLaughlin, right? Yeah. I mean, these are 2 NFL players, 2 NFL draft picks, difficult guys to replace. Maybe there's a trust factor there. Maybe it just takes time to develop the rapport and chemistry, but that's the part that should worry Arizona fans the most to me. It's the passing game is just not as crisp as it was last year for all those reasons.
And maybe we underestimated the loss of Jacob Cowing and Tanner McLaughlin, and also the running backs too. Losing 3 of your top rushers in Jonah Coleman, Michael Wiley, and DJ Williams. We thought, well, they got some good ones in Quali Conley and Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. Kedrick Reesano was a highly touted recruit coming out of high school. Maybe, he turns things around in his college career. And with the running backs, we've only seen Quali Conley produce because Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt is dealing with eligibility issues. The NCAA/compliance raised the concern that maybe Ja'Cory doesn't have any eligibility remaining. And so they decided to sit him out for the last couple of games. A really weird scenario happening with Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. And so you take him out of the equation. Rayshon Speedy Luke hasn't quite lived up to the expectations that we thought he would have, or, the expectations that we had going into this season. He hasn't lived up to them. And so the running back group has been a little underwhelming. And so I look at the 3 running backs that they lost last year. I look at Jacob Cowing, Tanner McLaughlin, Jordan Morgan.
I was going to say, there's one more. There's the first round pick at left tackle.
Yes. Yeah. Jordan Morgan, and also the 9 scholarship defensive linemen, guys that graduated or went into the portal. Like we kept talking about, 4 out of 5 defensive backs coming back. They got Noah Fafita and Tetairoa McMillan. All these guys are coming back. Arizona should win 9 games, right? But we underestimated, and I'm kicking myself for underestimating the loss of those guys that we just mentioned, and it's showing in these first 3 games.
They can still win 9 games.
Oh, for sure. They can go 7-2 the rest of the way and go to the Big 12 championship.
Yeah, they were 3-3 last year at the halfway point of the season. They ended up winning 10, right? So things can turn around. It's just, I think it's shame on us to a degree for maybe, underestimating those losses.
Yeah.
I did write a piece before the season raising concern about the lack of size on the defensive line. I don't think that's been as big of an issue as the lack of discipline on the defensive line. Like they've played 2 mobile quarterbacks who are liable to scramble or keep the ball, and they have not done a good job of containing the edge, right? Their rush lane discipline has been pretty bad on the part of the defensive ends, more so than the defensive tackles. The lack of size, I think, has impacted Jacob Manu. He has not been as consistent or as effective as he was when he had those bigger guys in front of him, occupying blockers and freeing him up to do what he does. The Jordan Morgan thing, obviously a huge deal, right? Your replacement, Rhino Tapatotai, a redshirt freshman, looked really good throughout camp, off to a good start, suffered a lower leg injury, misses the end of the first game, misses the entire second week. Was he ready to come back? I don't know.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. He certainly didn't look like he was 100%. He gave up 6 pressures in that game against Kansas State. Would it have benefited him to have been held out another week? Then he's off for week 2, week 3, plus a bye. You come back, you're feeling really good. You're strong. You're not worried about your injury or whatever. And he has plenty of other things to worry about, by the way, because he's a redshirt freshman who's making his second career start and his first career start on the road, right? Yeah. So there's a lot going on there. I'm not surprised that he struggled, frankly. So yeah, I think people also sort of misconstrue what was available to Arizona in the portal, right? I've seen a lot of comments out there like, oh, their talent assessment in the portal was so bad. Like, how could they miss? They should have a higher hit rate. You have to understand, the portal opens in early December, okay? Almost all of the best players are locked up, signed, committed by the early January, okay, within a month or so. Arizona did not, this staff did not get access to the portal until mid-January, right? At which that was similar to when Jed took over in 2020, 2021.
Yeah.
Right? You look at, it was sort of like whoever's left at that point. No offense to the guys that they have. I think they did a good job of finding the best players that they could, but you don't have access. It's like the full menu at the beginning of the day at a restaurant versus we've run out of a bunch of things at the end of the day. Yeah. And there's like 3 things left, might still be a good meal, but you don't have, it might not be the very best that the restaurant has to offer.
Yeah.
People have to keep that in mind.
And, those players that Arizona, signed, because remember, they'd had a whole press conference before the Alamo Bowl talking about these are the guys that we're bringing for 2024. So they had guys signed, they had their pick of the litter, and then Jed Fish went to Washington and essentially took, some of those guys with him, like Jordan Shaw from Indiana, and of course a couple of players currently on the roster. But yeah, I agree with you, Lev. I don't think this staff had everything available to them, and what was available to them, like the San Jose State guys, other players that are looking for places to go because their coach decided to go somewhere else. When Arizona got things started in the transfer portal, it was because of the coaching carousel. That's how Arizona got access to the portal, and then they got the spring transfer portal, which isn't as intense as the one that you see in December.
Yeah, the best players, you could make a case, that came to Arizona via the portal are the ones from San Jose State. Trey Smith and Quali Conley. Could maybe make a case for Chase Kennedy as well. He's off to a pretty good start. But, the players that they had to pick from were Washington players, Alabama players, and San Jose State players, which were the schools that were impacted by those coaching moves. And for the most part, the players from Washington and Alabama were never giving Arizona any consideration.
No.
Right? So it's just a limited pool to choose from. And we're seeing some of the impact of that.
Lev, I have some mailbag questions that I think we should answer before we get to Big 12 Bonanza. This one comes in from Brad Malone at Bear Down Bias. Brad is a longtime supporter of the podcast. We appreciate Brad a lot. Brad asks, are fans overreacting, or do the Wildcats have a long season ahead of them? I was thinking about this. Part of me thinks that fans are overreacting just a little bit, but there's also expectations that were placed on this team. And a big part of those expectations were guys like me and you saying, like, yeah, with the core of guys that they have back and a favorable Big 12 schedule, why not Arizona contending for a Big 12 championship? Look at all the players that they have right now. I think it says a lot that Brent Brennan was able to secure some of these players and keep them back here. But, with all these players coming back comes with expectations. And, we all thought that Arizona would at least be competitive in every single game and not get blown out. If you lose a game, lose it by a touchdown, lose it by a field goal. Heck, I'll give you 10 points. But to lose by 24 points when it could have been a whole lot worse, I agree with Arizona fans as to why they think it's unacceptable for something like that to happen. Just don't get embarrassed. Arizona lost by a total of 16 points last year in those 3 games. They lost by 24 to Kansas State. So even last year in those 3 losses for Arizona, they were right there in the game in the fourth quarter with a chance to win. So, no, I don't think Arizona fans are overreacting. Are there some fans that you find that you're just like, okay, pump the brakes here a little bit? Like, I've already seen a couple of fire Brent Brennan posts. Like, come on, what are we doing here? But I think Arizona fans do have a right to feel this way.
Yeah, I don't think they're overreacting in terms of worrying about this year's team. I think they are definitely overreacting when it comes to this coaching staff. Like, I've seen people online, message boards, etc. Brent Brennan's not it. He's going to be out of here in 3 years. He hired his coaching staff is terrible, etc., etc. Like, hold on, okay? This is not some unproven coach. All right, this is not Jedd Fisch. Jedd Fisch had never been a head coach anywhere before, and if you wanted to question his bona fides, back when he first started, I totally get it. He was also starting from a different place, taking over a team that had lost 12 straight games. Brent Brennan taking over a team that went 10-3. As you mentioned, expectations much, much higher. It is arguably harder when you take over a team that's already on top than one that is fighting to get on top, right? If they were 6-6 last year, people would not be having the same sense of panic, right? But they went 10-3, and people expect them to go 10-3 again, compete for the Big 12 championship, all of which could still happen. Brent Brennan has proved himself as a program builder. He's proved himself as someone who knows how to evaluate talent and get the most out of that talent. Those things take time. People are expecting immediate results, and they're going through some growing pains right now in a lot of ways. So, this Utah game upcoming will be pretty telling, maybe as far as how this season goes.
This one comes in from Garrett Lutz. Here's my serious question. The defensive line looks legitimately bad. Does it seem more like a scheme or a talent issue? I think, honestly, more so scheme than talent. Like Trey Smith, if you want to talk about one of the top guys that put pressure on the quarterback this year, it's Trey Smith, but it's not translating to sacks. I think Chase Kennedy, if you look at his Pro Football Focus grades, he's got, I think, the best pass rushing grade out of any Wildcat on the team right now. I think Tai Uiagalelei, the versatile defensive lineman, I think is very solid. And, you like a guy like Chuba Ma'ai to have his size there in the middle. And, the guys behind him, I think, aren't bad after all. I think, they've been a little underwhelming. I'm talking about guys like Kayvon Darton, Stanley Ta'ofu from USC. Like, those guys have been in the mix. We just haven't really seen those guys make plays. But I think what it really all comes down to is, scheme. This Arizona defensive line last year, a big reason why they were so good at stopping the run. Arizona had top 30 rushing defense last year after having one of the worst in college football the year prior. And the reason why was because guys like Bill Norton and Tyler Manoa and Taylor Upshaw, they didn't get too reckless. They didn't, get too far downfield and create lanes for, athletic quarterbacks. They just they were gap sounded, and they didn't allow any big plays to happen. And that was perfect for guys like Jacob Manu to get creative when, blitzing or, trying to make a play behind the line of scrimmage. Right now, it looks like Jacob Manu is going to have a drop off in production. And I think a big part of that is because he's getting swallowed up because of how the defensive line is playing. So I think it's more so scheme, but I also think that the personnel isn't quite as good as the ones that we saw from a year ago, but I'm leaning more towards scheme.
I would lean that way as well. They're not as big. They're not as deep. I think the frontline guys are pretty good. But as mentioned earlier, they've played two teams with dual threat quarterbacks where they're going to try to run. And these guys are not carrying out their responsibilities. I mean, I can't imagine that it was not a coaching point going into both of those games. Do not rush past the quarterback. Keep your eyes on the quarterback. Don't get caught don't get sucked in to the inside run if there's doing the mesh point on the inside. Hold your position. Wait, be patient. I'm sure all of those things were talked about. They have not been executed properly. Schematically, they are having a different approach than what they had before. They're all about getting vertical, getting into the backfield, which sounds great on paper, but when you're facing a quarterback that can run, and if you get too far, you get too wide, you get too far inside, you're setting yourself up for trouble. And they have not played those mobile quarterbacks very well. I don't know how many legit dual threat quarterbacks there are left on the schedule. And I know they got KJ Jefferson coming up at some point. Space U, ironically, is second in the nation in rushing yardage. It's like 375 yards a game. So there's going to be more of this coming. And if I'm someone who's facing Arizona, whether I have a super mobile quarterback or not, I'm going to put some designed runs, some zone reads into my game plan because they have not handled those plays very well at all.
A lot of questions regarding play calling, Lev, and I'm just going to kind of lump all these in here. Thank you guys once again. If you're, a follower of myself and Lev on Twitter, you listen to this podcast, thank you guys once again for submitting your mailbag questions. We always thank you guys for that. But we have a lot of questions regarding play calling. And let me start by saying I am one of the last guys to give anyone advice when it comes to play calling, especially if you watch me play college football 25, right? I'm not trying to sit here and pretend like I'm a know-it-all, but I will say that a little bit has been head scratching with both sides, right? And Dwayne Akina, longtime defensive coach, a guy who's been there, has done that. I mean, the man has coached in freaking the best college football game of all time in Texas and USC. This man has been around the block. But I will say I was a little stunned when I didn't see Arizona use the double eagle flex defense or get creative with the linebacker blitzes or just play just really aggressive against Kansas State. It seemed like Kansas State always had Arizona on its heels, and it wasn't Arizona punching Kansas State in the face. I was a little, a guy like Dwayne Akina who always preaches physicality and playing tough. I thought Arizona's defense played very finesse against Kansas State, and it was very unlike Dwayne Akina. And then as far as the offense goes, where are the tight ends? In spring, in training camp, we saw these 12 personnel sets. We saw Kean Burnett. He was essentially unguardable. He was this weapon that Noah Fafita could use outside of T-Mac. Heck, even Jeremiah Patterson as a slot receiver. Like, those two guys have been MIA, minus Jeremiah Patterson's 17-yard touchdown against NAU. But, those guys I thought would be the best pass catchers outside of T-Mac and Montana Lemonious Craig, and they really haven't shown up. But the tight ends, Lev, I got to say, I'm a little surprised. I thought that Arizona with Kean Burnett and Sam Olsen, the transfer from San Jose State, and even Roberto Miranda, he showed that he was improving as a pass catcher. Where are the tight ends? I'm just so confused by everything.
Yeah, I don't really get that part of it. We all saw what we saw in camp with Kean Burnett. Like, the breakout seemed to be imminent.
Yeah,
100%.
and
we can't see everything that goes on with the routes, and we don't know where he is in the progression, whether he is the primary read, secondary or third or whatever, whether he's getting open or not. I do know that when you look at the numbers, Noah Fafita is not throwing as many passes in the middle of the field, either behind the line of scrimmage, short or intermediate, as a year ago on a percentage basis. So that part of the field is not being utilized as much. They also don't have the slot receiver that they had last year in Jacob Cowing, whom you referenced earlier, who had 121 targets. And that was only 9 fewer than Tetairoa McMillan. Currently, like, the disparity is it's absurd. I think T-Mac is 33. The next highest guy has 10, right? So they're not spreading the ball around. And 88 of Jacob Cowing's targets, the air yards were 9 yards or fewer. So that short yardage, like, outlet guy was Jacob Cowing. And they are missing that element in a big way. And that dovetails with what I was saying earlier about Noah holding onto the ball longer. Like, I don't think he has that outlet to get rid of the ball quickly when the blitz is coming, and teams are blitzing them more too. It's like 50% now versus 43% or so last year. Defensively, I was disappointed, as you were, that they never used a spy the entire game. Not like, I don't think they used it one single time. Like, I just throw that wrinkle in there. Just let Manu be the spy, or Tay Brown, or whoever. That I was shocked that they didn't mix it up a little bit more. I will say one other thing about the defense in that game. After Traden Stukes got hurt, there was a big drop off. Owen Goss, who looked like promising, a transfer from Colgate during training camp, he really struggled in that game in both run and pass defense. They were down, Traden Stukes and Dalton Johnson, who didn't dress for that game. I don't know how many snaps the three amigos, Traden Stukes, Dalton Johnson, and Gunnar Maldonado, have been on the field together this year, but it seems like one of them has been missing most of the time. And that's a big deal too, as to why the defense struggled a little bit.
All right, now moving on to our Big 12 picks for the week. It's time for Big 12 Bonanza. Lev and I are going to go through the list of games this week. Obviously, Arizona has the week off. They'll return next week to play number 12 Utah in Salt Lake City. It does not get any easier for the Arizona Wildcats. And Utah, as we all know, has had Arizona's number over the last several years, with the exception of last year. Arizona just completely took it to Utah and won, by 4 touchdowns. It was 42-18. And with Dorian Singer, former Wildcat, on the other side, with that 28-point beatdown a year ago, I think Utah is going to be very prepared for this game, and they're going to want to put the hurting on Arizona. So the Wildcats got their work cut out for them, but we're not talking about that game. We're talking about this week's games. But first things first, Lev, how are we doing in terms of standings and all that?
Well, it was a rough week last week for some of us. I went 2-6 against the spread. Justin was 3-5. Brett Farah, our editor, who's not able to join us this week, he'll get his picks in a little bit later. He was 4-4. We all had Kansas losing against UNLV. We all took Arizona with the points, which was a mistake, obviously. West Virginia, we all had West Virginia. They were up by 10, and then they weren't. They were up 34-24 late in the third quarter. They ended up losing 30 in the fourth quarter, ended up losing 38-34. UCF was up 28-7. I'm sorry. TCU was up 28-7. UCF ended up coming back to win that game. You guys had UCF. I had TCU, so I was on the wrong side of that one. So rough week for the gang. We are all 11-13 against the spread through 3 weeks. I feel like there's going to start to be separation now, because a lot of these games can go either way. As you will see when we go through it, the point spreads are really close. A lot of toss-up games. We will start with Kansas at West Virginia. This is a 9 a.m. game in Arizona. This game is on ESPN2. It's in Morgantown. The Mountaineers are favored by 2.5 points. man, two really tough losses in a row for the Jayhawks, at Illinois and at home against UNLV. A little encouraging note, if you're a Kansas fan, they've held the last two opponents under 300 yards. So that's a good sign. The bad news, your quarterback, Jalen Daniels, has thrown 6 interceptions, which is twice as many as anyone else in the Big 12. One of these teams is going to be 1-3 at the end of this week. Even though Kansas has not held up its end of the bargain the last couple weeks, I'm sticking with them. I'm going to take those 2.5 points and take the Jayhawks in what really feels like a toss-up game. West Virginia, total gut punch loss to Pitt last week. It might be a little difficult for them to recover from that.
I think if West Virginia figures out a way to not allow Jalen Daniels to use his legs, if they keep him in the pocket and allow him to beat them with his arm, then I think West Virginia is going to figure out a way to win this game because, like you mentioned, Lev, those turnovers, very troublesome for me. I just think on the road, if you don't take care of the ball, you're not going to win this game. And I think, once again, Kansas will struggle to take care of the ball, and I'm going to go with the Mountaineers to win at home.
All right. Another 9 a.m. game features Houston at Cincinnati, two 2023 newcomers to the Big 12. This game is on FS1. It is at Cincinnati, and the Bearcats are favored by 3.5 points. Houston, maybe better than we thought. They held Rice to 159 yards. They went on the road to Oklahoma the week before, and they only lost 16-12 against an Oklahoma team that's ranked in the top 20, and is expected to be a contender for the playoff this year. Houston is last in the league in total offense, 314.7 yards per game, but third in total defense at 258.7. Cincinnati's kind of the opposite, and they've been moving the ball up and down the field, scoring well, but they are last in the league in defense, giving up over 430 yards per game. I do like how their quarterback transfer from Indiana, Brendan Sorsby, has played so far. He's got a 6-0 touchdown to interception ratio. I feel like Houston is still figuring out its quarterback situation. So based on that, I am going to take the Bearcats and lay the 3.5 points.
Cincinnati with a big win over Miami of Ohio last week, 27-16. I just feel like even in ugly games, Cincinnati, I still like them to win. And so if Houston makes it ugly, I still like the Bearcats to figure out a way to prevail. So give me Cincinnati.
3.5 points is one of the larger spreads of the week in a conference game, but still not that much. All right, so this next one is one of the non-con games. This is Arkansas State at Iowa State. This is an 11 a.m. game. This is an ESPN Plus telecast. Iowa State is giving 22 points to visiting Arkansas State. So 22 points is an interesting number, Justin. You know why?
Why?
Because Iowa State has played 2 games, and they have yet to score as many as 22 points in either one of those games. They've scored 20 in one and 21 in the other. This is not an offensive juggernaut. That feels like a lot to me. Arkansas State, plucky, right? They lost to Michigan 28-18 last week at the Big House, covered a big spread. I say they do it again. I'm going to take Iowa State to win. I will take those 22 points, though, and take Arkansas State to cover. Hey, if it's a 3-touchdown margin, you're still on the winning side.
I'm a big fan of Rocco Becht. I think he's very accurate. I think he's got 70.5% completion rate. Plus he's also got 4 touchdown passes. He's averaging just under 13 yards per completion. Like Iowa State, they can sling it when they want to. And so against a struggling Arkansas State team, I think this is Iowa State's chance to get a really good win before they get into the meat of conference play. So I'm going to go with the Cyclones to win and cover.
Yeah, Rocco Becht would have some very nice NIL opportunities if he played here in Tucson.
Rocco's.
With Rocco's Little Chicago Pizza.
Good stuff.
Commercial tie-in there for him. All right, so maybe the hottest team in the Big 12 that no one's really talking about very much is Arizona State. They killed Mississippi State, or they beat Mississippi State at home. They were in control of the game. Mississippi State kind of came back at the end, but they beat an SEC team for the first time ever. Then they went to Texas State in what felt like a trap game on a Thursday night, and they came out on top, 31-28. They're 3-0 for the first time in a long time. So they're visiting Texas Tech, second trip in as many weeks to the state of Texas. This game is also on FS1. It is the 12:30 game on FS1. And the Sun Devils are getting 3 points. Texas Tech is getting the home field bump of a field goal. This Texas Tech team has been kind of all over the map. They had that wild opening game, 52-51. They got blown out by Washington State. Then they scored 66 points last week against North Texas in a big win. Baron Morton actually leads the Big 12 with 10 touchdown passes. Texas Tech, they are the second highest scoring team in the league. Arizona State, kind of more ball control. They really like to rely on the running game with their big back, Cam Scadaboo, who's been very impressive. I was impressed with the athleticism of their defensive backfield in that game against Texas State on Thursday night. The one thing that worries me if I'm Texas Tech is my rushing defense hasn't been good. They're giving up 181.7 yards per game on the ground. All that being said, I think it's going to be hard for the Sun Devils to make 2 trips to Texas in as many weeks and come out victorious both times. So I'm going to take Texas Tech, lay the 3 points, and go with the Red Raiders.
Me too, man. Listen, I'm not trying to discredit ASU and their wins this season, but Mississippi State paid Toledo, $1.2 million to come down to Starkville and give them a good old-fashioned ass whooping. And then you also have Wyoming, which you saw on paper, and you're like, man, what a big win for ASU. Wyoming in the post-Craig Bowl era, not
terrible.
so good.
Yep.
Awful.
Yep.
So I take these wins with a grain of salt. I'm not trying to totally discredit ASU and their wins, but these opponents aren't as good as we thought they were. So give me Texas Tech to win. I think Arizona State is a nice story this year. Kenny Dillingham doing some big things, but I think they get a little slice of humble pie against Texas Tech.
That's the reverse Denny Green, right? They aren't who we thought they were. Okay. The premier matchup of the day, Utah at Oklahoma State, number 12 at number 14. This game is on Big Fox. It is at 1:00. I feel like it should have been the big noon game. They instead went with Marshall against Ohio State because, Big Ten Network, aka Fox, sort of interchangeable. Anyway, when I sent out the picks earlier today, the point spread was 2. Utah favored on the road against Oklahoma State. Cam Rising is back. I mean, that is the big storyline heading into the game. They found a way to win without him last week, but usually when he plays, it makes a significant difference. Oklahoma State struggling on the defensive end. We saw how Arkansas was able to move the ball up and down the field against them in that wild game a couple of weeks ago. So I feel like they're a bit vulnerable there. They did play a nice, clean game against Tulsa last week. Alan Bowman threw 5 touchdown passes, which is very encouraging. But Utah's got a really good pass rush. They are tied for the Big 12 lead in sacks with 10. I say they do kind of a lot of Utah stuff in this game. They rely on their defense. They're physical, maybe a big play on special teams. Very difficult game to handicap and predict, but I'm going to go with Utah to win and cover the 2 points at Stillwater.
Great minds think alike. I think Utah is perfectly matched up for Oklahoma State. One thing Oklahoma State does well, they run the ball well. I mean, they have Ollie Gordon, the reigning Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. But Utah is Utah. They have a great front 6 or front 7. They have great defensive linemen. They have great linebackers. And so if we're in a position where Alan Bowman has to beat Utah with his arm, then I'm going with the Utes because, I saw a scenario in which, Alan Bowman tried to quarterback the Oklahoma State Cowboys in a very tight game against Arkansas. And, Arkansas had their moments where they would run down the field and have big plays. I think that Utah is going to do the same thing. I think with Cam Rising, with Dorian Singer, Brant Keithy, and the other weapons that they have, coupled with their hard-nosed defense, I'm going with Utah to make a statement on the road, because when we talk about the hierarchy of the Big 12, these are the two teams that immediately come to mind. Maybe you throw a Kansas State in there as well, maybe even an Iowa State. I don't know. But when you think about the top of the Big 12, like two teams that you're going to bank on contending for a Big 12 championship, this year it's Utah and Oklahoma State. And I think with the chance to really show why they are the preseason favorite to win the conference, I think Utah will flex its muscles and get a big win over Oklahoma State.
All right, we have the Battle of Texas next. It's TCU at SMU. This is sort of also the Sonny Dykes Bowl. Sonny Dykes had been the coach at SMU, and he left to become the coach at TCU. TCU is favored by 3 points in this game. This game is on the CW at 2 p.m., and that's because SMU is an ACC team now. In case you forgot, as mentioned earlier, TCU was up 28-7 in the third quarter last week. They were up 31-13. 5:03 left in the third quarter. They got outscored 22-3 from that point forward, and a 1 point heartbreaking loss to UCF. SMU is going to have a new quarterback this week. They decided to make a change during their bye. TCU's quarterback, Josh Hoover, has played really well so far. He's averaging 340.7 passing yards per game, which is the most in the league. Has 8 touchdowns and no picks. Similar to what you were talking about earlier with Wyoming, I think SMU is just not as good as people thought, even though they spent a lot of money in the NIL space. They struggled to beat Nevada in week 1. They lost at home to BYU. If SMU can lose at home to BYU, they can lose at home to TCU. So I'm going to take the Horned Frogs and lay the 3 points.
Everything that Lev just said on the money. Give me TCU.
All right, we get too much agreement so far, Justin.
I know.
That's a bad sign for these teams, and I'm pretty sure we're going to agree on the next game too. So Colorado is hosting Baylor. This game is on Big Fox. This game is at 5 p.m. Colorado is favored by only 1.5 points, which I find to be a mystery. Like, why is this spread only 1.5? Baylor, not considered an upper echelon team in the Big 12. Now, Baylor has played pretty well to start the season. They completely shut down Air Force 31-3, outgained them by more than 2-1. They're first in the league in total defense. They're first in the league in pass defense. But you have to put that into some context. Air Force doesn't throw the ball, right? So that's going to kind of depress your passing yards against. And their first game of the season was against a lightweight in Tarleton State, another one where, the Tarleton State in that game passed for 80 yards. Okay. So, they haven't faced a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders. Colorado, let's give credit where it's due. In the last 6 quarters, they've given up 9 points. So there's been all this criticism of Colorado's defense. It's terrible, etc. 9 points in the last 6 quarters. That's a very good sign. Will they have a letdown after the very emotional game against Colorado State? Maybe so. If you're one of those people who likes to bet on first halves, maybe you take Baylor in the first half of this game. But I think 1.5 points is not nearly enough. I got to go with Colorado in this one. I'm going to take the Buffaloes to win and cover that 1.5 pretty comfortably.
Vegas knows something. I don't know what Vegas knows, but they know something, because to be honest with you, if you were to tell me, hey, Justin, handicap this game, I would have said Colorado -7.5, -8.5. I would have picked Colorado by a possession or two. The fact that it's this close lets me know that Vegas knows something that we don't know. I think Dave Aranda is a really good coach. If you look at the games after this game, Colorado's got to play UCF on the road. Then they have Kansas State at home, and they got to go on the road and play against Arizona. So it's going to be a tough stretch for Colorado after this game. And you know what? I think Baylor's going to pull off the upset. I'm not sure how they're going to do it, but I'm going to go with the Baylor Bears to pull off the upset against the Colorado Buffaloes. I think that a letdown game is due for Colorado, and it probably will be on the road next week when they play against UCF, because Lev just lauded Colorado's defense, and we mentioned how UCF has the second best rushing attack in college football, so maybe that's when Colorado's defense finally crumbles. But something tells me about just an off game for Shedeur and company, and I'm going to go with Baylor to win.
Yeah, it's a very strange point spread. I mean, this game is in Boulder too. It's not like it's at Baylor. I don't really get it. All right, last game of the night. This is Kansas State, number 13 in the country, at BYU. This is an ESPN telecast at 7:30 p.m. For those of you who thought there'd be no more late games with the new fangled Big 12, you are wrong. One of the reasons the Big 12 wanted to bring these teams in was so they could have more time zones, more time slots, get that sort of exclusivity, which is actually, in my opinion, a net benefit for the league. I know it annoys a lot of people. Anyway, Kansas State is giving 6.5 points in this game. We saw what they're all about last week. They're good on special teams. They can run the ball, played some aggressive defense as well. BYU is overachieved. I think they have exceeded expectations thus far. I know you're a fan of their quarterback, Jake Retzlaff. BYU is number 2 in the league in total defense. And critically, Justin, they are 3-0 against the spread so far. I say BYU goes 4-0 against the spread, covers the 6.5. Kansas State escapes by a field goal at the buzzer. I'm taking the Wildcats straight up, the Cougars with the points.
I think running the football and defense travels. If Kansas State can replicate exactly what they did against Arizona last week, then Kansas State is going to be just fine. And I think BYU is, in comparison to Arizona, in a much inferior team. And I think that this is going to be a game where you're going to see Avery Johnson at his best once again running the football. We haven't really seen it in the first couple of games, and then boom, Avery Johnson explodes for 130 rushing yards. I think he maintains his rushing attack. I expect another big game from DJ Giddens, Dylan Edwards. Are they going to get a punt return for a touchdown? Likely not. But I also don't think that they're going to repeat the meltdown of the first half that we saw, i.e. missing a field goal and running out the clock. I think Kansas State learns from their mistakes. They play smart on the road. And you know what? We talk about Oklahoma State. We talk about Utah winning the Big 12. I know that Arizona fans are disappointed in their Wildcats, but the Wildcats from Manhattan, they look like a force to be reckoned with. It would not surprise me if we see them sniffing the college football playoff or maybe even getting into the whole thing. So I'm going with Kansas State. They're a really good football team, and I like them to win and cover.
There's our Big 12 bonanza.
That's
for
it.
Week 4. Hopefully we'll do better against the spread than we did last week. Of course, you can always just go against us. That might be a good formula for success for a lot of people out there. It's kind of weird, Justin. There will be 2 Saturdays in a row in which Arizona is not playing football.
Wow, I didn't even realize that.
Isn't that strange?
That is bizarre.
Yeah, and then they have another bye week later in the season, and another Friday game. So there's 2 more Saturdays during the season when Arizona won't be playing, which is great for us because we get to watch ball.
Damn straight. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the Wildcast podcast. Check out Lev's cat stats on Tucson.com. Also, with Arizona taking some time off with a bye week, the coaches are hitting the recruiting trail. They're going to go out on the road and talk to some of their 2025 recruits. I did kind of a rundown of 10 notable guys that you should monitor this season. Arizona's got some pretty good players coming in, especially from the state of Texas. Terry Shelton, their wide receiver, was recently upgraded to a 4-star status on 247sports.com. So Wildcats got some promising prospects coming in for 2025. And as Brent Brennan noted earlier in the week, they love developing guys. They want to be a developmental program, get guys in here over the next few years, develop them, and then use the transfer portal kind of like free agency, where if there's a position of need where you don't really feel comfortable with the guys you have right now, then you go in the portal, see your options, and then plug and play. So I think Arizona's got a nice little recruiting strategy going on here. Check out my story on Tucson.com, also the Wildcaster app. Everyone, have a great weekend. Enjoy the Big 12 football. We'll see you guys next weekend right here on Tucson.com and also the Wildcast podcast.